So you want to own a taxi company. You buy the cab. You buy the little metal plate that lets it work. Then you either drive it yourself or you hand the keys to somebody else and collect a fee twice a day, every day, for as long as the city keeps the number of plates fixed. A license to print, bolted to a hood. Sounds simple. It isn't, because that little plate was once worth more than a house in most of America, and then it was not, and the city never changed a single rule to make that happen. So what does one of these cost now? What does it cost to keep it legal? Why did an asset that only ever went up for 70 years lose most of its value in 4? And why is the most important thing about this business a promise that was kept? Start with the plate, because the plate is the entire business. It is called a medallion. Small metal shield, riveted to the hood of a yellow cab. Issued by the city's Taxi and Limousine Commission. It grants one thing and one thing only: the right to pick up a passenger who raises their arm on a New York street. Not the right to drive people. Anybody with the right license can drive people. Only the exclusive right to the street hail. There are 13,587 of them authorized in New York City. That number has barely moved since the 1930s, and we will get to why in a few minutes. They come in 2 flavors. An independent medallion can be owned by one person who owns no others. Corporate medallion has to be held in groups of 2 or more, and there is no ceiling on how many a company can stack up. That split is written into the original law, and it is the reason this industry has both immigrant owner-drivers and fleet operators running hundreds of cars out of a garage in Queens. Now the price, and this is where the story lives. In 2014, the average medallion changed hands at about $1.3 million. Today, depending on whose numbers you take and whether the buyer is paying cash, they trade somewhere around $100,000. Recent market tracking has put the cash price near $102,500, off from a high of about $117,500 late last year. Read those 2 figures next to each other. 1.3 million. About 100,000. Nothing was recalled. Nothing was canceled. Nobody's plate was taken off their hood. Then, the car. Medallion is useless without a vehicle hacked up to city specification, and increasingly, that vehicle has to be wheelchair accessible. A federal court mandate requires half of all authorized medallions to be attached to an accessible vehicle by the end of 2028. Roughly, 58% of active medallions already are. So, the ramp, the modified floor, and the higher purchase price are not optional extras anymore. They are the cost of the license staying valid. And then, the choice that decides which business you are actually in. Door 1, you drive it yourself. The medallion is your job and your retirement plan and your only asset, all at once. Door 2, you never touch the wheel. You lease the cab out by the shift and collect a fee. That is the classic medallion business, and for 50 years, it was one of the most reliable cash flows in New York. How does one change hands? Through brokers, through lenders unwinding defaulted paper, and through owners who have had enough. There were around 1,000 medallion transfers in a recent year, so this is not a frozen market. It is a quiet one, and most of the volume never gets advertised anywhere a member of the public would look. So the plate is bought and the cab is hacked up. Here is everything that arrives with it. First, the rulebook. The Taxi and Limousine Commission sets your fares, your inspection schedule, your vehicle specification, your driver requirements, and the maximum you are allowed to charge a driver to lease your own cab. Almost every lever a normal business owner would pull is welded in place by a city agency. Second, insurance. Commercial taxi liability in New York City is one of the most expensive insurance products in American transportation, and it does not care whether your cab is busy. It is a fixed annual number sitting on top of an asset whose income is not fixed at all. Third, the inspections. Every medallion cab goes through mandated city inspections, and a cab in the inspection line is a cab earning nothing. Fourth, and this is the one that breaks people, the loan. Almost nobody bought a medallion with cash at the top of the market. They borrowed. And the loans written in that era were frequently structured with very little down, short terms, and a balloon payment at the end, on the assumption that the medallion would be worth more when the balloon came due, and could be refinanced against the higher value. That assumption is the whole crisis in one sentence. Every one of those loans was underwritten on the belief that the plate could only go up. And you inherit a labor market you do not control. Your driver needs a city-issued hack license, which takes training, a medical, a defensive driving course, and a fingerprint check. That is a real barrier. And it means the supply of people legally allowed to sit in your cab is much smaller than the supply of people who can drive for an app tomorrow afternoon. Fifth, storage. If you cannot find a driver or the economics stop working, you can put a medallion into storage with the city. It stops being a working asset and becomes a stored one. As of early this year, more than 2,700 medallions were sitting in storage rather than on a cab. Sit with that. Roughly 1 in 5 of the city's authorized medallions was parked, not because the city withdrew it, but because nobody could make it pay. Now, the money. 5 ways it comes in. Number 1. The meter. The standard New York fare starts at a $3 initial charge, then 70 cents for every fifth of a mile above 12 miles an hour, or every 60 seconds is slow traffic. Then the stack of surcharges. 50 cents to the transit authority. $1 improvement surcharge. $1 overnight from 8 at night to 6 in the morning. $2.50 during weekday rush hour. Another $2.50 state congestion surcharge for anything touching Manhattan below 96th Street, and 75 cents more below 60th. None of those numbers are yours to set. That meter is a government price list. Number 2. And for most medallion owners, this is the actual business. The lease? You rent the medallion and the cab to a driver for a 12-hour shift. New York caps what you can charge. A day shift is capped at $105. A night shift runs from $115 up to $129, depending on the day of the week, because Friday night is worth more than Sunday night. Weekly leases are capped separately, around $630 for a day shift and $737 for nights. 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week, is 14 shifts. Fill all of them at the cap, and one medallion generates somewhere around $1,500 a week before anything is taken out. That is the machine. An owner does not drive, does not take fares, and does not care what the meter says. An owner sells time on a piece of metal. There are 2 shapes to that lease. You can rent out the medallion together with a car you own and maintain, which pays more and makes the vehicle your problem. Or you lease the medallion alone to a driver who brings their own hacked-up vehicle, which pays less and hands the maintenance, the tires, and the depreciation to somebody else. Most first-time owners underestimate how much that second option is worth. Number 3. E-Hail Dispatch, which is new and more than a little strange. The apps that destroyed the medallion's value now send it work. Uber alone said it referred more than 7 million trips to New York yellow taxis over a 12-month stretch, including over 800,000 in a single month. Though the company that took the street hail away is now a wholesale customer for the cars it took it from. Number 4. Airports and flat fares. A trip between Manhattan and Kennedy Airport is a flat $70, plus surcharges and tolls. It is the only flat fare in the city, and airport work is a meaningful share of a yellow cab's day, which is also why softening international tourism shows up directly in this business. Number 5. Advertising and the plate itself. Rooftop advertising and in-cab screens generate a small ongoing stream, and the medallion sits on the balance sheet as collateral, borrowable against, sellable, inheritable. For decades, that last line was worth more than all the others combined. Now, here is the number that explains everything else in this video. In 2014, a New York City taxi medallion was worth around $1.3 million. Today, it is worth about $100,000. Listen to that again. $1.3 million to roughly $100,000 in the space of a few years. And here is the part almost nobody says out loud. New York never issued a flood of new medallions. The cap held. There were about 13,600 cabs when the law was written in the 1930s, and there are 13,587 medallions authorized today. Scarcity was protected perfectly. It just stopped being worth anything. Open the ledger, and you can see why the fall was so violent. Start with the loan payment, because for an owner who borrowed, it is the largest single line, and it does not move. A medallion, bought near the peak, carried a debt that assumed $1 million asset. The asset fell by more than 90%. The payment did not fall at all. Then insurance, which in this city is brutal, annual, and indifferent to how many shifts you manage to fill. Then the vehicle. A taxi is an unusually hard life for a car. It runs 2 shifts a day in stop and start traffic, and it wears out on a schedule measured in months, not years. Accessible vehicles cost more to buy and more to maintain. Then the medallion's own carrying costs. Renewal fees, inspections, meter and technology system fees. The garage, if you are running a fleet, plus dispatch staff and mechanics. And storage is not a pause button. A stored medallion still has to be renewed and kept in good standing, and it earns absolutely nothing while it sits. It is the cheapest way to lose money in this business, which is why so many owners choose it over the alternative. And then the invisible ones, empty shifts. Every shift you cannot fill is $105 or more that never arrives, while the loan, the insurance, and the depreciation carry on exactly as before. Driver scarcity. A medallion without a driver earns nothing at all, which is precisely why thousands of them sit in storage. And the quiet one. Optionality. Old medallion economics had a second engine underneath. If the year went badly, you could always sell, because the plate was going up. Once the plate stopped going up, owners were stuck holding an asset that only generated cash and no longer generated escape. Now the mechanism. This is the part worth understanding, even if you never go near a taxi. A medallion was never a taxi business. It was a bet on a government promise, bought with borrowed money. That promise was specific. New York guaranteed the number of vehicles allowed to accept a street hail would stay fixed. It kept that promise. It is still keeping it. What the city never promised, and could not promise, was that the street hail would remain the way New Yorkers get a ride. So the apps did not break the cap. They made the cap irrelevant. A phone summons a car that never needed a medallion, because it is not a street hail. And the entire legal fortress the medallion sat inside turned out to be guarding a door nobody was using anymore. And this is what borrowed money does to a story like that. If you had paid cash for a medallion in 1990, you would have had a bad decade and an asset worth less than you hoped. Because most buyers borrowed heavily against a peak valuation, a price decline became a debt crisis, and a debt crisis became a human one. Yellow cab trips are still running at under half their level before the pandemic, while the app sector has recovered almost fully. Yellow cabs held about 13.5% of the city's legal for hire trips in early 2026. In Chicago, where medallions once traded around $350,000, some later changed hands for a few thousand. So, how did a piece of metal ever become worth $1.3 million in the first place? For that, go back to 1937 and to a rescue. New York, in the middle of the Great Depression, had somewhere north of 30,000 cabs on the street. In an industry with almost no rules, fares were cut to nothing. Unlicensed drivers worked the curbs. Drivers were putting in enormous days and taking home almost nothing, because there were far too many of them chasing the same passengers. A city legislator named Lou Haas proposed a fix. Capped the number of licensed cabs at the number already operating, and let it shrink from there through attrition. It failed on its first attempt and passed on the second. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia signed it. New York issued about 13,566 medallions. Price of admission, $10. One historian, who wrote the definitive social history of the New York cab driver, put it plainly. Nobody expected the medallions to ever be worth more than that $10 license fee. It worked in the way it was meant to work. Fewer cabs chasing the same riders meant drivers could earn a living. By the end of the Second World War, attrition had cut the number to 11,787, and it stayed at that number for over 50 years. But something was created that nobody legislated. Because the plate was transferable, and because the supply could never grow, the medallion quietly became a financial instrument. By 1950, it averaged around $5,000. It kept climbing for the next 60 years. nobody sat down and designed a million-dollar asset. A Depression-era rescue for starving drivers accidentally minted one. And then, time did the rest. Now the collapse. Not the price collapse. The one underneath it. In May of 2019, the New York Times published a two-part investigation by the reporter Brian Rosenthal. That story was not the one everybody assumed. Assumption was simple. Uber arrived. Medallions fell. Bad luck. The investigation found something else underneath that. It reported that a handful of industry figures had spent more than a decade artificially driving the price of medallions upward and channeled thousands of drivers into loans they had no realistic prospect of repaying, extracting hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. Brokers, lenders, lawyers, and fleet owners did extremely well out of it. The leaders of nonprofit credit unions became multimillionaires. Buyers were overwhelmingly immigrant drivers, many with limited English, signing documents they could not fully read, on the understanding that a medallion always went up. Response was immediate. The day after publication, the state attorney general opened an inquiry into more than a decade of lending practices, and the mayor ordered a separate investigation into the brokers. That series won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting the following year, and it documented roughly 1,000 bankruptcies among drivers, alongside deaths in the driver community that the city itself later acknowledged as part of the crisis. Then the lenders went down with them. Melrose Credit Union, a Queens institution that had been operating since the 1920s, had loaded itself with taxi medallion loans. State regulators took possession in early 2017. It was liquidated in August of 2018. Lam-To Federal Credit Union, which had been created specifically to serve taxi owners, followed weeks later. Federal insurance covering credit union deposits recorded losses of more than $750 million from these and related medallion failures. Read the shape of that. Institutions that made the loans were destroyed by the loans. Regulators had flagged concentration risk years earlier. Everyone in the chain was betting on the same single assumption, that a government cap would hold and would therefore stay valuable. Cap held. Value did not. So what happened to the people who survived it? And how does anyone run this business now? First thing that happened was not a market solution. It was organized pressure. The New York Taxi Workers Alliance, led by its executive director Bhairavi Desai, ran an encampment outside City Hall for a month, followed by a hunger strike lasting more than 2 weeks. In November of 2021, the city announced an agreement with the Alliance and with Marblegate Asset Management, the largest holder of medallion loans. Under it, outstanding loans were restructured to a principal of $200,000, made up of a $170,000 guaranteed loan plus a $30,000 city grant, 5% interest, 20-year term, monthly payments of $1,122. And critically, the city itself guaranteed the loans, which meant a default no longer put a driver's home at risk. City relief programs have since delivered well over $470 million in debt relief. That is the single most important fact for anyone looking at this business today. That debt was restructured. A medallion you buy now is not carrying the ghost of $1 million loan. Beyond that, the operators who make it work do 4 things. They buy the plate for what it produces, not for what it might be worth later. A medallion is now valued the way a laundromat is valued, off the cash it throws off. And that is a far healthier way to own one. They fill both shifts. Everything about a leased medallion comes down to shift occupancy, and everything else is noise. They take the app work. Pride is expensive. A dispatched trip from an app pays the same as a hail. And they treat the vehicle as a consumable, not an investment. Budget the replacement, run it hard, replace it on schedule, and they buy at a price that survives a bad year. Everyone who was destroyed in the last cycle had bought at a number that only worked if things kept improving. The owners still standing today are the ones who priced in a year where trips fall. Because in early 2026, trips did fall. So does it work? Start with the good version, and it is better than most people assume. According to city data, from April of 2026, full-time yellow taxi drivers grossed about $87 per working hour, made up of roughly $76 in fares and $11 in tips. Full-time Uber and Lyft drivers grossed about $66. Yellow cab drivers wait longer between fares, but earn more while carrying one. For an owner leasing out a cab, 14 filled shifts a week at the caps is roughly $1,500 weekly, or somewhere near $75,000 a year of gross lease revenue per medallion, before insurance, the vehicle, fees, maintenance, and any debt. At today's medallion price of roughly $100,000, that is a real business with a real yield, which is exactly what it was never allowed to be during the bubble, when the same cash flow had to support a $1.3 million valuation. Now the bad version. Yellow cab trips fell year over year in early 2026, even as the overall for-hire market grew. More than 2,700 medallions sat in storage. And the Green Borough Taxi program, launched to bring street hails to the outer boroughs, has seen its daily trips fall by about 98% from their peak, with driver earnings collapsing from around $114 a day at the peak to roughly $52. That is what happens when a license keeps its legal exclusivity and loses its commercial relevance at the same time. Which brings it back to the promise. In the last video, the trucking authority died because Congress printed more of them. Anyone could have one, so nobody would pay for one. The medallion died the other way around. Nobody printed a second one. The number is almost exactly what it was in 1937. The city kept every word of its promise and enforced it and defended it in court. You were never buying a business, or a car, or even a license. You were buying a place in a queue the city swore would never get longer. It never did. People just stopped standing in it.